The scent of salt and the rhythmic creaking of timber filled the sailor's senses as he stood upon the rain-slicked deck of the warship, gazing out across the tumultuous expanse of the sea. In the distance, a menacing fleet of enemy vessels emerged through the mist, their dark silhouettes signalling the impending clash. As arrows whistled overhead and the ships closed in, he could now see what appeared to be lions' heads made from bronze. In their mouths, tiny flames danced ominously, a trick of the mind, perhaps. Suddenly, a jet of fire came flying towards him. He raised his hand over his face, but it was too late. The flames engulfed him. Ever since the First Punic War, the Roman Empire had been a juggernaut at sea, a nautical legacy that the Imperium's medieval successor continued. In this video, we will explore the 1,000-year history of the indomitable fire-breathing Byzantine Navy, examining the evolution of its technology and tactics, and delving into the mysteries of Greek fire, the medieval world's deadliest weapon of fiery mass destruction. This video is made possible thanks to the generous support of our YouTube members and patrons. Their contributions are the backbone of our work. As a token of our appreciation, our patrons and YouTube members enjoy 2 exclusive videos every week. Currently, they have access to a complete series on Xenophon's Anabasis, the First Punic War, History of Prussia, Italian Unification Wars, Risorgimento, and numerous other fun videos. Additionally, our Pacific War series is ongoing, and we're excited to announce the release of a new series on the Russo-Japanese War and Albigensian Crusades, and much more, exclusively for our backers. If you want to join this fantastic community, you can find the links in the video description and pinned comment. By becoming a patron or YouTube member, you'll gain access to exclusive videos, early access to all our public content, release schedules, wallpapers, and an invitation to our active Discord server, where we engage in lively discussions. Your support is invaluable, and we sincerely thank you for making our work possible. At its apogee, the Roman Empire controlled all the lands surrounding the Mediterranean, essentially making the sea a Roman lake, or as the Romans themselves famously called it, Mare Nostrum, our sea. The lack of any strong competitors in the waters of the Mediterranean gradually led to the decline and shrinkage of the Roman navy, which had limited itself to tasks such as pirate hunting and escorting merchant vessels. The old days of massive naval battles like Actium were long gone. However, the civil wars of the 4th and 5th centuries, as well as the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and the establishment of the Ostrogothic and Vandalic kingdoms, rekindled naval warfare in the Mediterranean. The Vandal fleets sailing from northern Africa and raiding the coast of Greece forced the Eastern Roman emperors to spend large sums of money to re-establish a strong navy. Despite the strong naval tradition of these lands, their attempts were not always successful, such as when the enormous 1,000-strong fleet of Basiliscus was almost destroyed, bringing the Eastern Empire to the brink of economic collapse. The true revival of Roman naval power came during the following century, especially under the reign of Emperor Justinian I, when he launched his massive campaigns to reclaim North Africa and the Italian peninsula. After this, the Mediterranean was once more dominated by the Roman fleet, even after the loss of much of Italy to the Lombards, who were not seafaring people and preferred not to clash against the Byzantine fleet. The greatest naval threat presented to the empire until the advent of the Islamic Caliphate came from the Slavs during the Sassanid siege of Constantinople in 626, whose canoes were still not up to par with the imperial Dromons. The Dromon was the primary warship of the Byzantine Navy, and was a new type of galley whose design had originated from the earlier Roman Liburnae, which were small but very fast ships. Yet the Dromons had characteristics that set them apart from their predecessors. They featured a full deck, a trait that would soon define all Mediterranean galleys, and used lateen sails as opposed to the square sails of the Liburna. Perhaps the greatest difference between the Dromon and its ancient ancestor was the abandonment of the waterline ram, an element almost synonymous with the ships of antiquity, in favour of an above-the-water spur that historians have suggested was used to break the oars of enemy vessels. No clear reason exists for why the Byzantines opted to abandon the ramming prow, but it is likely that innovations in the mortise and tenon method of construction of the ship's hull made ramming obsolete. The Dromons that first appeared during Justinian's reign were single-banked, with one mast and roughly 50 oarsmen, 25 on each side. In the 9th and 10th centuries, larger dromons appeared on Byzantine waters, with 2 banks of oars and roughly 100 to 120 oarsmen. These larger versions were also equipped with 2 masts instead of 1. The ships were steered using 2 quarter rudders at the stern. Also at the stern was the captain's quarters, a rather humble tent and a bed. Towards the centre of the ship, between the masts, there were wooden fortifications, the xylocastra, that provided cover for archers of the ship when they were engaged in combat. The archers were not the only attacking option of the ship, as they also carried a sizable marine force that could board an enemy vessel. Beyond this, the Imperial Dromons also had a trump card, a weapon that made them infamous and feared throughout the medieval world and remembered even today: Greek fire. Incendiary weapons were not a novelty. Many combustible mixtures made from sulfur and petroleum existed as early as the 9th century BC and had been used by the Assyrians. But the exact substance that came to be known as Greek fire was discovered around 672 AD, ostensibly by the Byzantine engineer Kallinikos, who was born in Heliopolis in modern-day Lebanon. However, some historians have suggested that Kallinikos merely improved upon an existing weapon, or that a team of scholars created the substance. On the complete opposite bank of the river stands Emperor Constantine Porphyrogenitos's account, which states that the recipe was revealed by an angel to Constantine the Great. While there is little doubt that the creation of this medieval napalm was not due to divine intervention, the emperor's account goes to show how important the secret of Greek fire was to the Byzantines. In fact, the level of secrecy surrounding the weapon was so great that none of the empire's enemies were ever able to copy either the flammable substance or the method of deployment. A great example of this is the capture of both siphons and large quantities of the substance by the Bulgarians in 814, who, despite having large quantities of the chemical substance in their hands, were unable to figure out how to reproduce their own. Even the Byzantines' chief enemy of the time, the Arabs, were unable to copy the siphons, and used pots filled with their own incendiary mixture that were thrown by hand or artillery such as catapults. Greek fire's uniquely destructive properties, such as its ability to burn on water and only be extinguished by sand or vinegar, were truly miraculous, but so was the means of its deployment, the siphons. These tubular projectors were usually mounted on the dromon's prow under a forecastle that would provide cover for the operators, but in later times and when facing more dangerous enemies, additional devices were installed in the midst of the vessel or even at the stern. We don't know exactly how the mechanism was made, but some sources give us a general idea. It seems that the oily substance was heated inside a bronze vessel, while a hand pump would add in air to pressurize it. When the proper pressure had been reached, the crew would open a valve and the oil would travel with great speed through bronze pipes to the nozzle. Just beyond the tip of the nozzle there would be a flame, either a torch or lamp, that would ignite the oil as it was launched at the enemy ship, with sources claiming that a loud roar and smoke accompanied the discharge. Portable versions, the gyrosyphon or hand siphon, were also created, with Emperor Leo the Wise claiming to have invented them in his Tactica. These smaller flamethrowers differ in their mode of operation, and were mostly used in land battles and especially sieges, as they proved extremely effective at repelling enemy troops. Perhaps the most famous incident where Greek fire was used was the Arab siege of Constantinople in 698, when the Byzantine Navy utilized its fearsome weapon to save the city. Yet despite having the Greek fire in its arsenal, the Byzantine fleet was not an unstoppable and unbeatable force. The weapon had limitations of its own, such as a shorter range than catapults, and was tricky and even disastrous to use in unfavorable wind conditions. Additionally, the Byzantines' enemies soon adapted to contend with Greek fire, such as the Arabs, who adapted their strategies to keep outside of the siphon's range, while also upgrading their ships with vinegar-dipped animal hides that were resistant to the flames. For centuries, these two naval powers would clash in the waters of the eastern Mediterranean, trying to wrest control of the seas from each other. Various treatises, such as the Tactica by Leo the Wise, Perithalassomachius by Nicephorus Oranos, and Praecepta Militaria by Nicephorus Phocas, give us insight into the tactics used by the Byzantine Navy of the early Middle Ages. Great emphasis was placed on the professionalism and training of both the admiral and his sailors, who should especially be well versed in the naval maneuvers that were necessary for fast ships such as the Dromons. The commander was also encouraged to fight mostly in areas of his own choosing, where familiarity with the local geography would grant him an advantage. He was also expected to coordinate plans with fellow captains using a signalling system, and even rehearse tactical plans before battles. The fleet, depending on its size and the environment, was usually deployed in a crescent, sigma-shaped or semicircle formation, with the flagship in the middle and the other stronger ships placed at the tips of the formation. Moreover, a reserve force was usually kept behind the main formation. The plan during most battles was usually to lure the enemy inside the curve and then surround their ships. Then they would attack using a combination of Greek fire from siphons, archer volleys, ballistas and catapults. After softening the foe up, they would send a boarding party onto the enemy ship. This was the main tactic that was used for galley warfare in the Mediterranean up until the 16th century. Through the use of iron grapples and ropes, a dromon could tie itself to an enemy galley. Sometimes, multiple dromons would dock to form a larger fighting platform. Once the ships were close, the Byzantines would use large spears, the manaula, to kill the enemy oarsmen. Other weapons used by the Byzantine seamen during the melee included swords and axes, as well as shorter spears and personal weapons such as knives. Great emphasis was placed on armour, with both the heavily armoured cataphracts of the upper deck and the rest of the crew wearing mail or lamellar cuirasses, padded jackets, helmets, greaves and vambraces. Naturally, the ranged troops and the oarsmen, who were not expected to be on the front line during close combat, had less protection. The organisation of the Byzantine Navy was similar to that of the Byzantine army. In response to the rapid Muslim advance into Roman territory in the early Middle Ages, the Byzantines created the Karabasiani fleet, which comprised the main naval force of the empire and was headed by a strategos. This highly monolithic system proved inadequate, and it was later replaced by a system that included naval themes, with the first being the theme of Kabehiots, the imperial fleet stationed in Constantinople, which was most likely created sometime in the 9th century, and highly local policing squadrons that belonged to land themes. As we have mentioned, the head of the fleet was called strategos, and the rest of the ranks followed a similar terminology to their land counterparts. Below the strategos there were usually 2 or 3 tomakai as vice-admirals. Below them the drungarii served as rear admirals. In the lower ranks there were the commies, who would command a squadron of 3 to 5 ships, while the captain of each ship was called the kentakos. Following them there were other officers, such as the protokaribi, who acted as helmsmen, the proteus, who was the prow officer, and the protolatai, who were the first oarsmen. The imperial fleet was a special case, with its commander called the Drongarios tou Basilikou Ploimou. While originally the title lacked much prestige, it soon rose among other offices and was classed separately from the other commanders of the themes or the tagmata in a group of officials called stratikai, just below the commander of the imperial bodyguard. During the Komnenian reforms of the High Middle Ages, and with the dissolution of the thematic fleets, this position was placed under the new office of Magas Dux, which was in command of the reformed and unified imperial fleet. The supremacy of the Byzantine Navy would not last beyond the 12th century. After that, while the empire still had a rich maritime heritage and skilled sailors, it was on the economic decline and could not compete with the rising naval power of the Italian city-states, especially Venice and Genoa. The disastrous Fourth Crusade only worsened the fate of the late Byzantine Navy, and while attempts were made to rebuild some of its lost strength, its glory days now belonged to the past. The most notable attempt to reverse the declining trend was made by Emperor Michael VIII, who created 3 new marine units, the Gasmuli, the Zakonis, and the Prosolentai, which were a dedicated oarsman corps. While the new Vasilikos Stolos had some success, especially under Philanthropinos, it was disbanded in 1283 by Andronikos II, who deemed the upkeep costs to be too great, and instead preferred to rely on the maritime strength of his Genoese allies. However, in 1349, the Byzantines were forced to raise their own fleet to fight against the Genoese, who had turned against them. In the ensuing battle, only 9 out of the 100 ships the Byzantines fielded were state warships, so the decisive defeat they suffered shouldn't come as a surprise. From Kantogozenos we are informed that later the Byzantine fleet consisted of 200 vessels. Still, the majority of these ships were requisitioned merchantmen, and sources never mention more than 10 imperial galleys. Such was also the case during the final siege of 1453, when the last small Roman naval victory, if we can call it that, took place when 4 ships from Chios with Genoese and Greek sailors sailed past the naval blockade of Mehmet's admiral Boltaglu and even managed to hold off an attack from the Ottoman navy for several hours. It is said that the furious Ottoman Sultan even rode his horse into the sea, cursing his own admiral, and later wanted to impale Boltaglu, who was saved by the pleas of other officials. Mehmet would then transfer part of his fleet overland into the Golden Horn and seal the fate of the city. The fall of Constantinople on the 29th brought an official end to the history of the Roman navy that spanned over a millennium. More videos on military history are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.